Well, I really thought I was done talking about roster mania, at least for this first part of 2025, but mousesports hit us with a massive curveball, one of the craziest moves that I could have never anticipated. And that is after kind of locking in that they were going to stick with their full five after the Shanghai Major, none of the pieces that had been projected to potentially leave mousesports left. You know, one of the big rumors was, of course, that Jimmy was going to go to Falcons if Muncie did to kind of create like a quote-unquote super team. But when that didn't happen, Jimmy actually signs an extension with mousesports. And so you really feel like this five is going to try to ride it out another year. And why the heck not? This is a team that was consistently in the top five throughout 2024. They had won a couple of titles. They were making progress, in my opinion, towards maybe winning even bigger ones. I mean, certainly did have a narrative over them that they would struggle on the big stages, that most of their wins were at smaller events or in a studio environment. But once they were underneath the bright lights and on the big stage with the big crowds, that they wouldn't perform up to the same standard that we would see from them in other matches. And while that was certainly true to some extent, I really felt like they had made some progress, you know, at events like IM Rio and the Shanghai Major, where they were actually beating some top teams on the big stage and they were actually making it to, you know, some big finishes. Yes, they weren't winning, but I mean, hell, at the Shanghai Major, they got a top four finish, only losing to the eventual champions, Team Spirit. And on all honesty, they gave Spirit one of their best series in that playoffs, you know, with it, I believe, going the full three maps and, you know, it being like a decent competition. So yeah, it's wild. You know, they come into 2025, they play the qualifier for this Blast Spring Bounty event. They lose to the new Bet Boom team that features Boomich and Axile coming over from Cloud9 and really improving that Bet Boom roster. They lose that 1-2, and then after that one online best of three, all of a sudden siuhy is out the door and they have picked up Spinx to replace him, and then Brollan is apparently going to become the IGL of this team. So this is a wild one. It's certainly not one I expected. I figured if mousesports was going to make any moves, it would have been that they just lost Jimmy to a better team, or maybe another top team picks up siuhy to be their IGL. You know, those were kind of the two moves that I saw as the most likely happening with mousesports, but never siuhy. And even if there was internal conflict on mousesports, you would think siuhy's value as an elite IGL would put him above anyone else as far as priority to keep on the team. I mean, you're talking about a guy who, in my opinion, is one of the best IGLs in the world next to Alexi B and Kerrigan. And, you know, maybe you would throw Apex into that list, or maybe you would throw someone like Blitz into that list. But I really do feel like he's certainly a top 5 IGL in the world, if not top 3, and really leaning towards the higher end of it. You know, I thought mousesports was a fantastic tactical team. They had a very deep playbook. They had a pretty solid map pool. And again, they were a very consistent top 5 team at the world, performing at a very high level. You know, I would rank him above Chopper, for example, on Spirit. Certainly would rank him above Snacks on G2. Again, I felt like he was kind of right there next to Alexi B, Kerrigan, you know, these types of characters as far as the value that he brought as an IGL. Now, sure, he was no fragging IGL, siuhy. I mean, certainly, you know, you're not going to compare him to someone like a Blitz or a Big Uzera or a Twist is doing at Team Liquid, you know, or something along those lines. But certainly was a solid IGL, could do decently as like a sacrificial entry. Hell, even in Shanghai, he was actually had some pretty good entry stats, and he would have the occasional mats where he would pop off. He even had some really big tournaments in the two that they won. I think it was EPL season 19 and then that first Bet Boom Belgrade event that they won. So yeah, this one to me is really crazy, and we'll kind of just look through the timeline of this and maybe try to somewhat read between the lines. Now, just to do a bit of housekeeping before I go on, if you don't mind, if you wind up liking this video, please leave a thumbs up and a comment down below. Also, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. We are trying to grow this channel. We're nearing 4,000 subscribers. Once we hit that goal, we'll be moving on to the 5,000 goal. And while we've been growing very steadily over these last few weeks, I'd love to keep that up. So if you don't mind, please do all the things. Subscribe, like, comment. So this is the first announcement that came out talking about this whole situation, and it just says that we are announcing updates to our Counter-Strike roster effective immediately. siuhy will be stepping into an inactive role as a result of differing visions for the team's direction. Brollan has been appointed as the new in-game leader, and additionally, Torzy and Zershin will undertake expanded responsibilities within the team, assuming they're going to be kind of second, third voices on the team, helping Brollan come up with game plans, yada, yada, yada. Now, Zelix from their Academy team will serve as a stand-in for IM Katowice. That's because their roster submission is already done, so they have to use him as a sub. I imagine, though, that Spinx, of course, will come in for PGL Cluj-Napoca or sometime very soon is kind of the obvious thing. So that's kind of the first word that we hear about it, right? Then we get this interview that comes out on play.gg as Mouz offers insight onto the Siuhy benching that the team needed a new impulse. And so this interview essentially is being conducted with Jan Dominicus, I guess is how you pronounce his name. I'm not sure. Sorry if I'm getting it wrong. He is their chief business development officer and their chief communications officer. So he's kind of the one that goes out, I guess, and does PR type stuff. I'm not really sure. Either way, he went on to say that as much as this is a commonly used PR phrase, the one referring to the, different visions of the team, while that's a commonly used PR phrase, I think it describes the problem of our team very well. We have several brilliant CS minds in our team, and for the longest time, we were able to balance it out. Now, we felt it was necessary to establish a new structure to keep improving. And so this seems to indicate that either it was Siuhy's leading style was clashing with some of the players on the team and what they wanted to do, or perhaps it was maybe clashing with their coach, Sakron. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, probably not. Or maybe there was some interpersonal stuff going on that is not ever going to be discussed because that kind of stuff usually stays behind closed doors, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. Now, as far as the timing goes, the decision bench their captain comes just a week into the new season and days before the start of IM Katowice, and this is also days after we've already had the big moves of Roster Mania. So if you want to make a big move, Roster Mania seemed like the best time to do it, when everything was going on after the major. And the decision bench their captain comes very, not an ideal time, explaining that Mouz hoped the situation would resolve during the offseason, stressing that things started to bloom towards the end of 2024. He says, clearly, we would have preferred to make this change during the winter break, but we were hopeful that vacation would provide the team with enough new energy to push through. I don't know what the hell that means. If you have differing visions on the team and people think differently about how the team should continue going forward, I don't know why you would think a vacation would just provide some type of solution on its own. Like, do you think that's just going to give everyone time to kind of cool their heads and they would come back and be able to compromise better and interpersonal situation after a vacation time? Maybe they just felt that everyone was in kind of a bad mood because they were on the grind and needed a little bit of a cool down. I don't really know what that means. It's kind of weird to me. But either way, the timing isn't ideal, but now we will put our full focus with the main goal being Austin during the first half of the season. So they're kind of admitting that it's going to be a rough transition period, these first few events together. Not only are you embedding a new fifth with Spinx, but you're probably going to have to move some roles around on the map. You're obviously moving Brollan into an IGL position. It's going to take him time to get up to speed doing that. And yeah, it's just weird. And then he said, I think after such a long time together, it's natural that sometimes everything becomes less exciting, both in and outside the game. We made the decision that in order to create new momentum, a change was necessary. Camille is without question a fantastic player in person. I know he will be successful in his next adventure. We strongly believed we could build on our 24 run this year. Some of our players have been together for almost 4 years now, and it's becomes apparent in the first weeks of the year that both our team and Siuhy individually needed a new impulse to keep growing. Tough decision, but I'm convinced it's the best for all parties. And yeah, just keeps giving praise about the person. Obviously, Spinx comes into the team as a replacement. But then this interesting thing came out from Nell. And while I have had my issues with Nell in the past, and, it is what it is, usually he's pretty spot on about roster reporting. And he mentions that apparently they were thinking about replacing Brollan with Spinx 3 weeks ago and keeping Siuhy as the IGL, which may have made more sense, to be honest, though I think it would have been tough because Brollan is a lot more aggressive than Spinx, and so I think it would have negatively impacted the team's dynamics, in my opinion, So that's kind of an odd one. Like, Xerxes and Brollan were clearly the two most aggressive rifles on the team. Jimmy, a very passive extremity player, towards easier opper, and then Siuhy was kind of flexing between being supportive and being an entry at times to set up, Xerxes or something along those lines. So that's a very odd one for me. But it's interesting that this piece of news is out there. On top of all that, apparently there was some stream where I guess Siuhy was talking to a friend of his, and according to some translations on here, basically what we got is that the teammates weren't really responding to Siuhy other than practice. That apparently no one would answer their phones. Some people muted their notifications. Some people would only accept notifications from like their girlfriend. And it basically just made it sound like this team really didn't talk to or hang out or communicate really at all outside of practice. And that's the only time the team really had time together was with the practice. So it seems like there was some interpersonal issues behind the scenes that we may or may not ever know the full story about, or maybe more stuff will leak about this before or after I put this video out and I'll miss it. But that's just some of the things that have been kind of being discussed at the moment. And so now the question becomes, like, what the heck's going on here, right? Because, again, I feel like Mouz were in a pretty good position before they made this move. I mean, again, they had just placed top 4 at the major, losing the Spirit in the best of 3, the eventual champions. They had beaten Mongols, though, who had been a team that was certainly on the rise at that tournament, and they beat a couple other decent teams as well along the way. They obviously did very well in the European RMR, going 3-0, including beating Navi. So they had a pretty good time in Shanghai, in my opinion. And then at Rio, they came second place. They beat Furia and Vitality and FaZe in best of 3s. And again, this is on the stage. They were actually beating teams like Vitality and Furia, including beating Furia on home soil, something that has often been a tough one for some teams. So the whole not being able to do it on the big stage narrative started to kind of crumble towards the end of the year, in my opinion, because of how well they played at Rio, coming second. They took a map off of Navi in a best of 5, wound up losing it 1-3. That was after losing the first 2 maps as well, so they came back from adversity and won a map being down 0-2, but they ultimately did lose the best of 5, sure. But again, they beat teams like FaZe, Vitality, and Furia in best of 3s, including some of those matches being on stage in Brazil. And so, to me, it really felt like they were on their way up. Now, it is true that the Blast World Final didn't go that well for them. They lost to Vitality really badly at the Blast World Final. Obviously, EPL Season 20, they went 17th, 20th place after losing to Imperial and Complexity a couple of times. So they certainly had their marks against them. But again, look throughout the rest of the year. Top 4 at Katowice, top 8 at the Copenhagen Major, second at IEM Chengdu. They won EPL over Vitality in a best of 5, as well as beating G2 and Complexity and a couple of other decent teams at that. Even when they wound up losing to FaZe at Chengdu, they had beaten G2 and Liquid and Furia. At Katowice at the beginning of the year, yeah, they didn't really beat anybody of big name value, but still a big finish. And then, yeah, they won the Bet Boom Belgrade event 3-0ing Spirit after beating Heroic and beating Virtus Pro. And yeah, Virtus Pro wasn't that great, but Heroic was becoming a pretty solid team around that time. And then they came top 4 at Cologne, beating G2 again in a best of 3, ultimately losing to Vitality in a very close 0-2 series where they went to overtime on Inferno, and then they lost Mirage 11-13. So, again, there's a couple of dark marks on this team, you know, at the Blast World Final, the second Bet Boom Belgrade event, EPL Season 20, but again, some super highs with the top 4 at the major, the second at IEM Rio, the top 4 at Cologne, and then winning EPL Season 19 and winning the first Bet Boom Dachau Belgrade event against elite level teams. And again, the whole stage thing comes up, but I really think if you look at the major in Rio, it seemed like they were making strides, in my opinion, on that front. And definitely had a very talented team. You know, again, siuhy, I thought, was one of the best IGLs. They looked great tactically. Xerxin, pretty solid entry fragger. I would certainly put, you know, the big names like Donk, Xantares, Elige, and Sani, you know, people like that ahead of him as far as how effective they are as an entry. Even Flames, you know, and several others would probably go ahead of him as well as far as their just success rate in opening duels. But Xerxin was still one of the best entry fraggers out there, so I'll give him props for that, although I do think he has struggled in the last 4 or 5 lanes that they played, and he was one of the ones that fell off the most individually on the big stage, so that's something to keep an eye on. Torsey, I always thought was a very underrated operator, very strong. Brollan, very good flex rifler, could play some extremity positions, but could also be like the other big aggressive rifle on this team besides Xerxin. On certain maps, he would be a guy who would kind of go in first or second and really be a big entry member of the team. There's only certain maps where he was like really playing extremity positions, like Long A on DusT 2, for example. Then he could break off of that and still be very active in some of their executes and do some good work. Then obviously you had Jimmy, who's just a really good passive extremity player, anchor, you know, just really everything you could want in that more like passive extremity player position. I thought the team had a pretty good map pool as well. Like their DusT 2 was pretty solid. Their Inferno was pretty solid. Their Nuke was really good. Yes, their Vertigo what started off strong but started to fall off, but that doesn't matter anymore because that map's out the pool. I would say the other worrying thing for me is they didn't play Anubis, and then their Ancient, they had lost their last 4 out of 5 games after starting the year very strong on it, but they were all very close losses. So I still think you could say they were an Ancient team. They were a pretty good DusT 2 team, a really good Inferno team. Their Mirage was a little bit hit or miss lately, but the majority of the year is pretty good for them. And then, yeah, their Nuke was balling. So, again, really good map pool, good talent, good in-game leading, good playbook, really good tactically, very good mix of being able to open up with different default variations, but then mix in, you know, these faster pace executes or these heavier mid controls. Their defense seemed pretty dynamic on how they can move towards these op around. Their rotators very strong and how they played things. So, yeah, I just don't really understand the need to push an IGL like siuhy out of this team. Like, I just don't see how this could have at all been the thing. I mean, unless there was just some situation where it was between him and the coach or him and the other players in the team and he was the oddball out, or some kind of weird situation like that. But yeah, I mean, it certainly can't just be performance based. I mean, I get that they plateaued to a degree, but I just feel like if you were going to make a move, siuhy surely wasn't the one that you should have moved, in my opinion. I think that he's like such a core piece, and getting a top IGL is so hard to do. And now you're gambling. You're gambling on whether or not Brollan can be a top IGL. Like, in theory, Spinx coming in could be a firepower upgrade because obviously he can frag better than siuhy can. And so maybe you will get a bit more firepower. Spinx obviously has more experience. You know, all these guys on the Mouse team, other than Brollan, have come from the academy system. That's including siuhy, who left, though he did have some time on Gamer Legion before coming back to the mousesports main team. So in that sense, yes, Brollan has been playing at a top level for a very long time. I mean, he was one of Vitality's best players throughout the entirety of 2024 and 2023, dating back to like late 2022 even. And then prior to that, you know, like the rest of 2022 and all of 2021, he was a fantastic player for Ints. So yes, you are in theory bringing in more firepower, but that's only if Brollan can maintain his level of fragging and be an adequate IGL. So that's a huge roll of the dice, you know, and I can't even really speculate or discuss that one too much further because I just literally have no idea what Brollan can do as an IGL. I don't know how much of a voice he has had on Mouse Sports throughout this time that siuhy was the IGL, or how much of a voice he had on previous teams he played for. I don't know that he's ever done any IGLing. I don't believe he has. At least I can't think of any, you know, just kind of going through his career. Don't ever recall that really being a thing. You know, when he was playing with NIP or Fnatic or, you know, Godson or Red Reserve or some of these other squads, like, I just don't think he ever did any IGLing. So I have no idea. Certainly he's played around some good IGLs, you know, from the Swedish scene, as well as playing alongside siuhy. So, and he's got a good coaching staff behind him. So it's possible he can mold into an IGL, but it's rolling the dice. Very similar to what Twist is doing with Liquid right now, where he's trying to not only be an IGL, but also a strong fragging IGL. And again, there's not too many of those. You know, again, you can count them on one hand pretty much. It's like Blitz, Big Uzera, and Twist, I guess, again, is trying to do that for Liquid. And then after that, yeah, there are some that are okay, but none that are going to be considered like a quote-unquote fragging IGL. Like Apex occasionally has pop-off moments in an entry role, or occasionally can have some big games, sure, but you would never really call him a fragging IGL. Kixon's entry stats were decent in Shanghai, and at times he can have a game here or there, but you really wouldn't call him a fragging IGL. You know, I guess when Kaden was a primary opera in IGL at the same time, he could kind of be a fragging IGL, but that was really more in CSGO in the latter years, and really didn't carry over to CS2 in this time with Liquid, or what he's doing so far with the Strauss, where now he has to be a rifler. So, yeah, like, it's just a rare thing to have that happen, and I just don't really see, you know, how that's going to work out, just being frank. Now, as far as how Spinx will fit into this team, again, he is a solid player. He is an extremity player in his own right. He's also kind of quite passive, so I feel like he overlaps with Jimmy quite a bit, to be honest with you. So he's going to have to get more aggressive than he's ever been before. Now, I will say, if you look at the last 3 months of his time on Vitality compared to the rest of 2024, his opening attempts on the T side did raise up a little bit, and when he does go for them, he's very successful. He has like a 54 to 58% success rate in opening attempts on the T side, but he just doesn't take that many. Like, at his lowest point, he was like in the 12 to 13% range, which is like close to one of the more passive extremity players, like a Jimmy, or like some of these other guys who, you know, aren't going for a whole lot, you know, on the edges of the maps. You know, like JKS would be one of those, although I will say he kind of evolved a little bit towards the end of last year as well. You know, compare him to someone like Rops was for a lot of the year, though he also did increase his output a little bit on the opening front on the T side, like kind of, you know, in Shanghai with FaZe. And so, yeah, I mean, I just not really sure how that's going to play out. As far as like what roles he's going to play on this team, Mouse don't play Anubis and Vitality didn't play Ancient, so those two maps are going to be kind of weird for me. If Mouse Sports decides to play Anubis, Spinx was to be extremity player and to be defender. So maybe they'll just let him keep that since he's comfortable with it and already plays that. As far as Ancient goes, Vitality didn't play it, but I'd imagine they would just have him play the B side of the map with Brollan and leave Xerxin at mid and leave Jimmy at A, and that will probably be how they roll things out on Ancient. as they try to phase Spinx into the team. And then DusT, he was a B Tunnels player for Vitality, which is the spot that Jimmy plays. But Brollan was a long A player, but I imagine you would have probably put, Brollan more in the pack with Torzy and Xerxin on DusT because he's IGLing now. And so that would leave the long A extremity open for Spinx to play, or maybe Jimmy could play it and Spinx could keep his B Tunnels position. Who really knows? We'll have to see how that plays out. Then on the CT side of that map, he would be a B rotator for Vitality, which is Brollan's spot now, but Brollan has been an A anchor in the past, which is what siuhy had been doing most recently, because like him and Xerxin had been kind of swapping who was the A rotator and who was the A anchor on DusT. So I imagine Brollan can just move back to being the long A anchor on DusT and give Spinx the B rotator spot, so that shouldn't be too harsh. But the T side of DusT is going to be interesting how they play that out. Then on Inferno, Spinx is an apartments player, which is the spot that Jimmy plays. So that'll be interesting to see what happens, because siuhy was kind of the guy who would assist Xerxin in getting B control, and he would, kind of roam outside of that, so you're probably going to have Brollan be in that position. He's probably going to be the one assisting Xerxin getting B control, and then maybe roaming middle or something like that if they're going for a more mid-heavy opening. Obviously, Brollan had played B control in the past, and Xerxin was a boiler player, so Brollan already probably feels pretty comfortable playing the B side of the map. But most recently, he had been playing the mid-boiler position, while siuhy and Xerxin and Torzy were like kind of the main B controllers. So Spinx is either going to have to take that mid-boiler position, or he's going to have to be a B control guy with Xerxin, or maybe Jimmy somehow moves to the boiler mid position and you give Spinx apartments. I don't really know. They're going to have to figure that out. That's another big head scratcher. CT side, though, Inferno, he will just be a 1-for-1. siuhy most recently was an A rotator. That's a spot that Spinx is playing for Vitality most recently, so that should be a 1-for-1. Mirage, yet again, going to be conflicting with Jimmy, as he was kind of the B apartments lurk to underpass type player. That's what Jimmy did. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I know that for Mirage, a lot of the time you aren't playing default anyway. You're usually playing a lot of 2, 3, and 4, 1 split plays, so maybe it won't matter too much what his default position is. But, we're going to have to figure something out there as far as like who's going to play the A extremity, who's going to play the B extremity. Maybe Jimmy keeps B, Spinx plays A. Who knows? I'm not really sure. CT side, he was a B rotator, which is Xerxin's spot right now, and siuhy was the A-con player. So, do you move Xerxin into A-con? Do you give Spinx A-con? Do you put, Brollan, who was the A anchor, into the A-con position, and then one of Xerxin and Spinx has to be an A anchor? Questions are going to be all around Mirage, in my opinion. That's one of the harder maps that they're going to have to try to figure out. And then Nuke, he was a lobby player on T side. Again, Jimmy's spot. So what are you going to do? Are you going to move Spinx into more of an active role outside with the rest? Are you going to do that with Jimmy? What are you going to do there? That's going to be interesting to see what happens. And then on Nuke, I don't think it'll be too big of a problem on the CT side, because I think Brollan and Spinx can just play upper together. They were both A-door players, technically, so the secondary outside, but I'm sure they can figure that one out. But either way, there's definitely some role clashing that is going to have to be addressed. There's definitely the question of, can Brollan keep his fragging up so this can actually be a true firepower upgrade? And then the obvious big question is, can siuhy actually be an IGL that can match the type of level of IGLing that siuhy gave to mousesports? Because he's going to be tested big time. Like, there are high standards for this team. Yes, they weren't necessarily always winning titles, but they were top 4 at the most recent major. They're a consistent top 5 team in the world, period. They very rarely finish outside of the top 5. The only times I can remember it would be EPL Season 20 and IEM Dallas. I think in the Copenhagen major where they placed top 8, losing the G2 in the quarterfinals. But yeah, top 4 at Katowice, second at Chengdu, first at EPL Season 19, first at Bet Boom Belgrade's first event, top 4 at EWC, top 4 at Cologne, second at Rio, and then top 4 at the major, and obviously won the European RMR. So those are high standards. And I feel like a lot of how they were able to achieve that was because siuhy was one of the best tacticians in the IGL slot in the world. Top 3, in my opinion. Yes, they obviously had talent, but man, you would pick the firepower over them on a lot of teams. Like, you would say, like Donk and Shiro's combo certainly stronger than Xerxin and Torzy, even though Shiro and Torzy are very different oppers. Don't get me wrong. Torzy's much more aggressive. But firepower-wise, Spirit, you might give Spirit a slight edge. though I do think like they kind of fall off a little bit because Ontic's inconsistent and so is Magic. So there's some debate to be had there. But like the top end of Spirit's firepower was certainly, they had more like true star talent between Donk and Shiro than Mouse really had in their best player, so to speak, which was Jimmy. Then obviously G2 back when they had Malbs, Nico, and Munacy, that was obvious. When Bit and JL were in their prime through a lot of 2024, they could have matched some talent for talent. Vitality, tons of talent between ZU, Flames, and Spinx. So like Mouse were doing a lot, despite the fact that you might call some other teams a little bit more skilled than them individually overall as well. So it's just like, I don't know, man. And as far as like Siuhy's future, I mean, he should be a prime target for almost everyone. I mean, there's teams that obviously aren't going to pick him, like a Spirit or an Astralis or a Furia or teams like that who speak a different language than English. But as far as international teams, if I'm G2, I'm thinking about him heavily in place of Snacks. Sorry. I know people are going to say that I had the Snacks bias, but even if I didn't, I still think that he's clearly an upgrade to Snacks as far as calling goes. And you give him talent like Malbs and Munacy and Heavy God, and he can definitely get some shit going on that G2 team. 100%. Okay, so that's one right there. Outside of that, I don't see him going to Navi or Vitality. I think that they're pretty well off with Alexa and Apex. Unless Apex does want to eventually move away at some point, then maybe you could see him be an IGL Vitality in the future, but I just doubt it. I think Apex still has a lot of time left in him if he wants to continue to play. If Kerrigan ever retires from FaZe at some point in the future, maybe he could fit there. But again, I doubt that's going to happen. They just got a Liege. They're definitely going to want to play with that roster for some time and see how that goes, so I doubt it. And so then after that, you have Liquid. If Twist wants to just be like, hey, I believe in myself as an IGL, but we have an opportunity to get Siuhy, like a proven IGL, that could maybe take us to the next level. There's going to have to be a debate there on Team Liquid about whether or not they decide to bring in Siuhy as opposed to continue to rolling with Twist as an IGL. I think a lot of fans probably want to see that happen. I wouldn't mind it because I'm still not totally convinced as Twist as IGL. I think there's still time and room for him to grow, but if you're trying to win right now, and you could bring in Siuhy and put Twist into a spot with Nerts where Nerts and Twist are your 2-star riflers, Siuhy's your IGL, Ultimate's still your big opper, and then you got Naf who can still be a fantastic player with limited resources. I mean, I hate to do it to JKS, but man, that would actually be a move that kind of slaps. Then obviously if you're Falcons, if things don't work out with Kixin at some point in the future, maybe you would consider Siuhy, but you can't right now because you have to keep that core 3 together for a long enough period of time to get your VRS and to not lose the spot that Falcons basically acquired from Heroic by picking up their core 3 of Kixin, Dexter, and Tessus. So, you know, that's where it kind of ends for me. And then we'll just have to see how it plays out. But, wow, crazy move. Can't believe it. Don't know that I agree with it. Siuhy, I think, is going to do something really nice for another team for sure. And, yeah, I'm just blindsided about this one. But figured I'd put something out there. If you like, please follow and subscribe. Would appreciate it. And see you next time.